Hello, y'all, and welcome back. Supposing instead of getting way into a huge, comprehensive list of the virtues, we say, look, let's keep it simple. We'll stick with the core four virtues. These have been with us since ancient times. The church agrees on them. Modern thinkers, both secular and theistic, agree on them. So we'll stick with justice, courage, self-control, and wisdom. Justice, honesty, fair dealing, generally doing the right thing. Courage, sticking it through pain, being willing to risk discomfort or danger for the sake of a greater good. Self-control, saying no to short-term pleasure for longer-term gain. And wisdom, generally making good choices. Doing this, we arrive at a thesis which is, in my mind, the most interesting single thesis in the history of ethics. I said a few modules ago that weakness of will is the most interesting question, and I stand by that. But as a thesis, this is the most interesting, and it's called the unity of the virtues. Now, the unity of the virtues we have from Socrates, if not earlier, and there are, by some estimations, like 25 different formulations of it. But I have my own, which I think is at least as good as any other, and here it is. Here's the unity of the virtues. It's in two parts. First, if you have one virtue, you have them all. Second, if you lack one virtue, you actually don't have any. So if you have one virtue, you have them all. If you lack one virtue, you actually don't have any. Now I want to consider some strengths and weaknesses. Let's start with the weaknesses, because the unity of the virtues as a thesis seems to wear its weaknesses on its sleeve. The first can be variously phrased. This is the first con or drawback of the unity of the virtues. Is that it seems obviously false. It seems way too strong. And in this usage of the word strong doesn't mean forceful or compelling or convincing, but it seems to be trying too hard. As the kids might say, it's doing too much. Supposing you have a friend who's kind and generous and loyal and faithful and good-humored, but they gossip. Does that mean that because they lack the virtue associated with gossip, they have this vice, that they therefore don't have any of the virtues and in fact are not a good friend or indeed a good person at all? That seems wrong. If I was to talk with all of my students one-on-one individually, or speak with you, I don't know, but I strongly suspect that the outcome, and I speak about morality, about ethics, personal ethics, right? I strongly suspect that the outcome of this conversation would be that you would say, look, I'm not perfect. I never claimed to be perfect, but I am good. I'm a good person. I don't have all the virtues, but I got most of them. I'm trying, I'm working, I'm getting there. And if the unity of the virtues on at least a strict interpretation is correct, you can't say that. You can't have some virtues but not have others. Either you have them all or you have none. So that's the first drawback. It seems way too strong. It seems to be claiming too much. The second drawback is this, and it's a fascinating objection. I know nothing even remotely like it in the history of ethics or anywhere in philosophy, and it's an objection that comes from a particular profession, and it comes from military service. And the fascinating thing to me about this is you find this in Plato, in the Protagoras, and you also find it in modern, like 21st century discussions of virtue ethics. And it goes like this. I'm just repeating what I've heard, okay? In the military, you find people, and in the literature it is invariably men, so I'll just say guys, who are bad guys. Just here and there in the military, right? You see them. Occasionally you see them. They're bad guys. They cheat on their wives and girlfriends. They drink, they gamble, they smoke, they cuss, they're short-tempered. Okay? They just seem to be bad people. However, in combat situations, when this person needs to risk their own personal safety or even their life, they seem to display exemplary courage. They seem in other areas of life to be kind of a dirtbag, not trustworthy, but in combat situations they seem to display courage. And this is a puzzle, because if the unity of the virtues is true, this should not be the case. It should not be possible. You just can't have one virtue. You can't have just courage and no other virtues, right? You either have courage and all the other virtues, or you lack courage and what you're displaying there is in some way not courage. But they do seem clearly to be risking their personal safety for the sake of a greater good. So that would be courage. But then how do you explain their other behavior? Again, possible considerations against the unity of the virtues. But there are some considerations in favor of the unity of the virtues. So the first is what I'm going to call the affair example. So imagine the best person you know who is in a committed long-term relationship, married or committed long-term relationship. So good person in a committed long-term relationship. Get them in your mind. Now imagine that person comes to you and they tell you that for a long time they have been cheating. They've been unfaithful to their husband, wife, partner. Now I don't know them and I don't know how you would respond, but I guarantee you that one of the things you would feel would be a certain degree of shock. There'd be a little bit of surprise that this is happening. But if the unity of the virtues is false, we're looking again at considerations in favor, you wouldn't feel shock. So here's what I mean. Somebody would come to you, they'd say, look, I've been cheating. And it would be, in your experience, a common thing for somebody to be just and kind and generous and loyal and faithful and honest, but totally unself-controlled with respect to sex. You'd see this all the time. But in fact, you don't see that. Character, in our experience, is a package deal. Somebody that is just and loyal and honest and generous and kind manifests that by being self-controlled with respect to sex vis-a-vis their partner and other people. So in other words, these traits kind of seem like they almost are the same trait, or they are one trait just manifested in different areas of life, which is again another one of the things at the Unity of the Virtues claims. If, without getting too specific here, a prominent figure who is supposed to be very good, let's say associated with the church, is caught in some horrendous scandal, okay, some terrible thing, we don't say, oh, this is a good person still. I'll still listen to what he has to say and go to confession and trust him with everything. He's just bad in this one area. It changes our total estimation of his character, do you see? This is evidence that the unity of the virtues in claiming that character is a package deal is in fact correct. So that's the affair example, although it clearly goes much beyond just that one isolated example. The second example is this, and this is drawn a little bit roughly from my personal experience. So supposing you, and I know this is true of many of you, not all of you, you have a small child and you're a busy professional, and so you need to put this kid in daycare. And because you're a conscientious parent, you research all these daycares really carefully. You research all the daycares in town and you examine them based on their amenities and their distance and their costs and all this sort of thing. And you narrow it down to two. You have the two finalists. You have one is the Happy Valley Daycare, let's say, and the other is my daycare, Dan's Daycare. Great name. And before you commit, you have these final interviews, and you're interviewing with me. And I am Dan of Dan's Daycare, and I say, hello, we here at Dan's are delighted that you're considering Dan's Daycare for your daycare needs. And I say, before you make your final decision, full disclosure, one thing you should know about me is I am a convicted felon. This is in the example, this is not real life, okay? But I say I'm a convicted felon. I did a number of years hard time. I embezzled a huge amount of money from my previous employer, took a bunch of money, took the company down, ruined a bunch of people's lives. But I've done my time, I've paid my debt to society, and I'm back here as an upstanding citizen running this daycare, and I would be delighted to have your child in my daycare. Now, two things are immediately obvious when you hear this example. First, and I don't want you to ignore this, on the face of it, embezzling money has nothing to do with the abuse or neglect of a child. Nothing at all, right? In fact, the same scrupulous attention to detail that enabled me to skim the books for all those years is the same attention to detail that may well keep your kid from falling downstairs or eating batteries. Nothing escapes my watchful eye. Okay? Second, though, nobody watching this video would consider Dan's Daycare for 2 seconds after I told you that. Why? Because we know that the way you treat people in one area of life says everything about the way you treat people in other areas of life. Character is a package deal. As the 20th century American humorist Dave Barry puts it, a person who is not nice to the server at a restaurant is not a nice person. This is true, always true, and there are no exceptions. Why is it that when you're on a date with somebody and they're really mean and rude to the server, that's a concern for you? They're not being mean and rude to you. We know, again, the way you treat people in one area of life will sooner or later manifest in every single other area of life. In life, there are many times when you need to decide whether you're going to trust somebody in whatever capacity, with your money, with your time, with your kid, with your affection, with your heart. And ideally, we all as adults know this. Ideally, the way to do this is to get to know them really well first. 9 months minimum, right? 12 months, 2 years, and then you make that call. And life almost never affords you that luxury, almost never. Instead, what you have to do is make a judgment call about their character based on a very small sample size of their words and behaviors, their words and actions. And because we know we need to do this, we practice this all the time, we've gotten very good at identifying concerning words, concerning behavioral patterns from this very small sample size. In fact, we've gotten so good, we have a name for them. We call them red flags. No one in the history of the world has ever been killed by a little red flag. Right? A red flag is itself not dangerous, it's just a flag, but it indicates danger. It's indicative of a much deeper danger. And this, again, taps into this core insight that I think the unity of the virtues brings out. We know, right, that character is a package deal. It doesn't mean that you possess all the virtues to the same degree. You might possess one virtue more than the others. It just means you can't possess one and lack all the others, or vice versa. So that's the unity of the virtues. I've taken considerably longer discussing this than I usually do, and I'd like to thank you for your patience with the longer video. But I do feel pretty strongly about it. That wraps up Virtue Ethics, and I look forward to joining you in our next module as we explore Nietzsche. Thanks.